in many ways. However, the job of a teacher, and they have a very limited time with students to influence.
I understand there are limitations in the Indian setup.
Right, I think it's boils down to how students process knowledge, and each student is wired differently, and you can broadly categorize students and learners in a certain way. Even the advent of technology is going to change what we look at many professions, including education, of course.
Welcome, Arjun, to One Young India's Development Dialogue series. What we do here is talk to experts, ask their opinion about India, and it could be anything related to India's education, healthcare, politics, economy, and so on and so forth. But since you're a celebrated counselor and you've guided, if not wrong, thousands of students till now, because I attended your workshop when I was in school, so I know you've been doing this since very long. And I'd love to hear your opinions about India and education.
No, I think it's a pretty broad topic, so I think we'll have fun having this conversation. So yeah, looking forward. As far as being an expert, as a eternal student, I would say a search for knowledge is what we are all looking for. And I have strong opinions about knowledge, and then where that really rests or abides, and how we can see the differences in opinions playing out. And that's also a very healthy thing in critical dialogue and debate. And from eons in our Indian Indic knowledge sort of traditions, there's been an idea of which are synthesis of ideas as well as vivad. And so it's not, it's really appreciated that how the new NEP policy and even the advent of technology is going to change what we look at many professions, including education, of course. And closer to home, our counseling profession is obviously going through many conversations within our community. So yeah, and that could be a general opening for you, and you can take it from there.
Definitely. So, Arjun, again, the number one question that I typically get from students is, why should I make a change or a switch between boards, either from CBSE to IB or IGCSE, or vice versa? And there are a lot of parents who, seek that change. I understand there are limitations in the Indian setup. While the IB curriculum is, the way of doing things is much more holistic at times. What would you suggest? Do you have strong opinions about a particular preference of board or the way the students read in the grade 11 and 12? Because I'm sure that you've been having students from all sorts of backgrounds.
Right. I think it's boils down to how students process knowledge, and each student is wired differently, and you can broadly categorize students and learners in a certain way. And over so many years, I think from the first batch of IB in India, I've worked with students in India. Prior to that, I've worked with students in Singapore who were doing IB, or even in Switzerland who were doing IB. So I'm quite familiar with the evolution of IB. Like any other board, there are a few kids who enjoy a certain way of learning, and they do really well. It's also very case specific, so it's also subject specific. Whereas there are students I know who struggled in IB, and then I'm not sure if they would have struggled in CBSE or more traditional sort of boards. But in general, the question is, how does one personalize, individualize learning? And I think that's really critical. And that debate rages on. Schools are creating McDonald's. I mean, I'm not saying that there is no need for schools, but there is some merit in parents taking charge if they're not equipped. But of course, schools have the responsibility a lot more. But seeing schools in isolation of community or parents, the family unit, that definitely, sort of is something which is becoming more disturbing in today's age, where what you learn and value at home is perhaps not what is being sort of inculcated at schools at all times. And vice versa, schools are doing a great job in building a community of care, sustenance, and whereas families might have issues and the kind of things that kids go through these days at home. So learning is impacted in many ways. However, the job of a teacher, and they have a very limited time with students to influence many things in their lives, and the disposition they grow up with has created layers of maybe challenges for them to understand Vigyan, how to internalize knowledge, how to make it part of their character. And I think that's where the role of counselors comes in. So education boards can be anything, but I think someone having really vital conversations with students, parents, teachers in a much more holistic and a much more open format is always the need of the hour. And I think one-on-one coaching, the one which we sort of strongly believe in, really promotes that connection. First, make a connection, and then do an intervention.
Okay. No, I think I completely resonate with you here, because even till date, I have students who are in the final years of their, undergraduate degrees, and they struggle at times to have decent conversations, because either that was not facilitated at home, or only when they're sitting for the first job interviews, they realize that, oh, you know what, there's something missing, and probably we should have. And it's better, if it happens sooner than later, I believe that is where we should all be aspiring for. For example, I typically get students who ask very difficult questions to their parents, and the sort of conversations I end up having with the parents post that is that, I think that these are sort of conversations, difficult conversations at time, that you should have at your dinner table. By difficult, I mean ethical conversations about economy, about science, about tech, or whatever. But again, I understand that not every parent is equipped to do that. And while you are a great support of the Indic knowledge system, there is also that trend here now. Actually, there was this practice of sending students to Gurukul. So how do you think that has changed over the time? How can we implement that here now in the present context? And what role can parents play at home then?
Gurukul is I think a term. We see it alive even today in pockets. Wherever there's a teacher who is an acharya, which basically means someone who's living the values that they are so-called preaching or teaching, they attract good students. And we see that in schools, outside schools. They have, not saying a mad, blind following, but they do a good job. And so that's kind of a simplistic way to look at a Gurukul in a modern age. Again, going back to my opening remark, when I talked about the objective or the goal of knowledge, and that's been defined very interestingly in our Vedic literature, ancient wisdom literature and texts. The goal of knowledge, you'll be quite surprised, is to develop humility. Whereas the Western view of knowledge is making you an individual who's better than others. Again, Elon Musk's have a place in the world, and I respect a lot of the work he does. But that's kind of one of the epitomes of saying, okay, how to succeed. If you have that IQ above 170, you do like 10 different things and you're good at all of them. That's one worldview. Whereas humility, or able to sort of understand and promote the idea of authenticity, or even knowing when to be vulnerable and connect with people in a genuine way. I think these are qualities which you can use as strengths. And our knowledge literature has clearly defined and given so many examples in our literature to show that people who have that can be leaders, can be servant leaders to an effect that can impact the world in a huge way. So giving references of our ancient wisdom texts is become uncool, something that no one really bothers to dig deeper into. But once you do, you realize the poetry, just from the literary perspective and analysis, you'll find so much depth. And once you start doing that and include that just as an idea of social science and literature in our curriculum, and then see the magic happen, see that students will realize the depth of these, the teachers would probably include it. The idea of wokeism would be very easily defeated. So these are strong views. However, they're also timeless. It's just a matter of time when people start looking inward. So that's me part of your answer about origin of knowledge, but and the objective of knowledge. But there's something else. It's using a framework to live your life as a teacher, as an administrator, as a counselor, as a parent. And I think each one of us is finding our swadharma in some sense, which is our innate nature combined with what we should be doing in the world, which can obviously also help us make a living or be in a field which doesn't require, from the materialistic point of view, making a living, but doing something noble. So in our literature, we've seen that easily we've defined four categories, and I think casteism became this big thing in a negative sort of connotation. But broadly speaking, even if we just ignore that there was a idea of casteism which was cast on our society, all of us are either like teachers, or we are entrepreneurs, or we are kind of artists, or we are in some ways people who are looking or fighting for justice. So, and you can call them, Brahmins and Shudras and all of that, but it's really not so important. I think if you broadly see people in those categories and also combine it with some of our modern psychometric tools, which is, looking at a simple 16 PF test, which is available freely, and you can kind of combine those things and see where students or parents or teachers or even people in different professions lie and how they thrive. And with data available nowadays, if you can capture those traits, it could be possibly a very simple but very useful model to know where you should fall and what kind of careers or even subject choices which would be required to uh, meet the goals for your career would lie. So yeah, I think this is a long answer, but just thought I'll introduce that.
No, that's very interesting. So that brings me to something, because you ended our career, I'd been just thinking about it,
Yeah.
to the VUCA world, what we say today, right? Technology is going leaps and bounds. AI is out of hands. There are debates going around there, and every week there are new developments. That also brings me to a very interesting point, because I've seen my friends who've changed careers after 15 years of doing something, but there's new technology that has come up, and they've had to adapt to that or make something new, right?
Yeah.
Where do you see that technology playing a role right now for students who are to decide their careers? How should they look at this evolution of technology? Because it's not going to stop. How should they adapt to it?
No, it's interesting. I think generative AI is becoming commonplace, but AI as a tool is not common. It's been there even before Google came up with its rank engines. So this following the history of AI and the benefits it's provided. Of course, there are threats and there are naysayers and people who will misuse any technology. However, this is unstoppable. The human brain or mind doesn't really stop. So there are views where you can do meditative practices to shun all your thoughts. But the idea of shunning all your thoughts is also a thought.
Yeah.
So the mind, human progress, or whatever you may view it as, a negative or a positive thing, is really about our response to it. And that power we should have. The fear AI brings is a little bit twofold. As of now, the content, say on ChatGPT, is based on human created knowledge. So the data that they have is pretty much modeled on that. However, when there'll be more information which is generated out of these AI models, and we see that right now, there's a lot of inconsistency in the responses you get out of a AI generated prompt and answer. And you also get a lot more verbose, like just repetitive sort of paragraphs, phrases kind of hashed together. So it's obviously not so intelligent as we think it is, but it's a great framework. Like, a student doesn't know anything about a topic, it's way better than Googling it, which gives you a fairly good start point on a topic or even a project that you want to start. So I think That's where it is today. I'm not sure where it will be tomorrow. It will impact careers. So if a person knows that they have a disposition towards being a teacher, an entrepreneur, like someone who wants to fight for justice, be in the army or in the law field, or someone who wants to be an artist, have a patronage, sort of live a life of creative freedom, there's there's a way to use these technologies to figure, what careers or what challenges those careers pose in a much more better way than a Google would, search would. And of course, because not everyone has guides, right? Not everyone knows exactly. Read Entrepreneur Magazine or Fast Company. No, not many people know. And it requires some search to get to, or watch these podcasts, or listen to these podcasts and watch these videos on YouTube. So it does help you with a good start point based on ratings of these sites, etc., which is without looking at sponsored ads and featured posts, you can get a better sort of solution than Google provides currently. But let's see how it plays out. So it's a tool. I think students should use it to understand topics, look at career opportunities, but not get hijacked by it or not get numb by it. The chances of getting too sucked in and becoming brainless are pretty high, though. So I think that's the critical element. How do we train people to have the consciousness to decipher when is enough information? That's where I would stop.
Yeah, but that's very interesting. It reminds me to something in these conversations that I've had with a couple of principals also. And this is something that I truly believe, that you build critical thinking by writing. So I journal, right? And I think it's a very good way to think critically about things, that I see sometimes going out the window, and which is where I have a follow-up question on that.
Yeah.
That have you had students or your learners, your learning community, who tried to use these large language models to finish up their assignments, and where do you see that being used for college essays? Does it even matter, like if they use these AI tools for college essays? How is the process going to change with that?
Okay, so there are, I think, two parts. One is college related, college application related. And I think students, I would say even before the students use it, I use it in every meeting with my students. Be it it's an online meeting or if it's an offline meeting, I have my assistant ready with me. And I think it's a really useful tool. Topics I don't know and they're enthusiastic about, books they've read, I've not read, I can, on the fly, get a very quick summary of those books. May or may not be very accurate, but at least, when they're speaking, I can be smart enough to also read that 150-word little bio. But using it to write essays is always a tricky part. When the objective of a college application essay is to make you three-dimensional. And that comes from being authentic. I'm not even saying being ethical. I'm just saying being authentic will get you in, right? And students have been coerced to believe that many people can work on their essay and give opinions. And genuinely, I think if you were to face it genuinely, the fact is that an essay that finally reaches an college admissions inbox would have been tweaked, reviewed, edited from its original form multiple times by multiple people. Could be independent counselors in our industry, could be parents, could be the well-wishers of family, could be teachers. So what is the original essay is the question. And it's not a new question, but replacing all those well-wishers, so-called well-wishers. I mean, they feel that they're inputting and giving the student sort of doing a service for the student, but replacing it with ChatGPT is not really a complete solution as of now. However, I've seen students who've dug deeper and used ChatGPT as maybe a counselor. Like, they have hard questions in life. where they don't want to talk to friends or they don't have that comfort level to talk to their parents. And some of those stories that they sort of generate while having conversations with ChatGPT could be really useful to help them present a very good personal essay. Finally, again, that's just one example. So, for a student who's introverted, and I did this in a podcast I run with a person who's investing in AI companies, not now, but almost for a decade now. And so this question came up in my session with him, and he did say that there are kids who are introverted and would definitely find it a lot more useful to get support from a robot. Whatever it's worth, it's it's definitely a thought to mull over, where kids who are extroverted can somehow reach out for help and talk to peers, and even be okay meeting counselors for guidance. But there are many who don't, and they need these robots, I guess. Not sure if I answered your question. So the college admissions process is not just about the essay. It's a holistic review of the student. And the student can use any tools that makes them connect with what I call the framework, which is their true identity, places where they become a lot more pure and energized, things that they feel generates more respect for themselves and the world, or even aligning all these three, which is truth, purity, and respect, in such a way in their lives that they can make decisions about choosing the right college, choosing the right major, choosing the right career, perhaps later on in life, choosing what it means to have valuable relationships, what choices they can make to protect themselves from, say, mental trauma. Well, focus on well-being. These are a few things that I think can be taught. And tying it back to our Indian knowledge system, these are pretty well-established frameworks which need to be highlighted a lot more in our counseling world.
Perfect. So what I understood with this conversation was that, like you have financial literacy, which is considered, the skill to have.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, now there is also a need for media literacy in terms of how do you manage your media,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe an AI tool, which is where rationality has to be there. Like you can, there was, I think the previous conversation that we were having, you mentioned that there was a program that you were running, Majdar,
Yep.
right, which is more about rationality, where you are reading the left, the right, and you have the ability to decide what is good and what is not, and maybe just take those opinions. Just wanted to know that how can schools, counselors, parents at home ensure that there is this sense of understanding about what we are consuming and how should we evaluate that, what should we take with the sort of content that is being generated and thrown at us and at such a vast pace.
Again, I think I don't have sort of a very clear opinion on this, because by the very term, rationality means giving space to others and others' opinions. To be rational would mean to be discerning, but discerning on a platform. It has to be on a structured platform. Just being discerning is not enough. You should perhaps think of what are the values, beliefs that are more important to you as an individual or society at large, and the people you are with, sort of the association or company that you're keeping at a particular moment. So there are many different ways to look at it, and I have no clear opinion on how to sift through and find what is right in a general sort of discussion. But if it is a particular topic, it would be a lot easier to kind of nail. So yeah, I think if you want to elaborate a little bit more on that question, or if the question is more to do with finding the right information.
I mean, my point here is that right now I get complaints
Mm-hmm.
from parents or maybe from school teachers, and I've seen students, some of them, they're watching all sorts of content which is available on YouTube, which is primarily based on their digital footprint.
Mhm.
So what you watch, you're going to be fed that. You're not going to be getting intelligent recommendations if you don't do that.
Sure.
How can a school counselor or parent intervene in that stage so that the sort of media consumption that they have, they understand that where is that person coming from? Because I believe that with this sort of media, which now can be generated by anyone and viewed anytime, you're hearing n number of opinions. How do you figure that out?
Yeah. So it requires, I think, a lot of training
Yeah.
across the board. It can't just happen by a simple conversation. It requires, again, going back to one of person I really respect. He says, where attention goes, energy flows. It's like if you are ingesting something which is not appropriate for your student life, and that becomes kind of a generated, like you repeatedly getting sort of bombarded by that same sort of digital association, so to speak. It will definitely change your vibes, as in your whole ability to sort of stick to your true purpose of being a student. So I think the challenge here is the definition of a student again, and what are we really doing to help students understand what they are, what their purpose is in the first 20, 25 years of their lives. And I think that's going back to ancient wisdom again, like, where we had the idea of a brahmachari, which is like live like a monk till you're 25, not saying everyone should. But you can live a monk life or a student learner life till that time. Of course, it will be very much against the liberal part. But it's kind of an engine which is moving so fast, and it's something very few people can pause and stop and say, okay, well, if you were to change, then you have to change a lot of things, which means not just a conversation, it's a whole education.
No, but because you have people, adults who are watching this short form content, the attention span has gone down, and there is that lot of flexing that happens. I typically see students, maybe 11, 10, and they're flexing on social media. Oh, I got new shoes. I somehow, I know I got my first phone when it was the first year of my college, I think. Like first independent phone that I was supposed to keep with myself. Now I see that it's a piece of technology. It's an extension.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's also just the common idea of pride and self-esteem. I think are misconstrued sort of frameworks we live with. So if you look at excessive self-value we place on ourselves, can have a very negative impact. We want to project that we have this, say, new sneaker or daddy gifted phone, but deep down there's a sense of insecurity and hurt or whatever. It's just like the idea of, in the spectrum of being healthy, having healthy self-esteem, or having excessive self-value, which makes you a controlling, egoistic, narcissistic person eventually, is actually coming from a place of weakness. And I think those conversations, not many people are having with those kids at home or even outside. And by the time it becomes so innate in their nature to be sort of looking at pride and ego, false ego, I would say, as the most prominent part of their character, it's very hard to rewind. So it's not just about ingesting, it's about ingesting fine, but if you are also given sort of knowledge of these things, it could change many things in society.
All right. I know we were having a conversation, not naming schools, but you mentioned that there was also a trend these days where a lot of the school students are finding themselves in difficult positions.
Mm-hmm.
Cope up with pressure. I don't know whether it's peer pressure or bullying. I really have no idea. Since you talk to many of them, would you like to share what can students overall do to, first of all, not be trapped in this?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is lack of knowledge again, which is living their lives in a unintelligent sort of realm, which could be even just the idea of fear of failure. And that's the latest blog post I just wrote. And it has so many layers. It's connected to self esteem, it's connected to pride, it's connected to unsaid expectations. So if you sort of dig deeper into all these three, fear of failure is like probably the biggest stress giver. And I conducted a poll on LinkedIn recently, which is more directly related to college admissions. And luckily, I got very good responses. And again, the highest response was fear of getting rejected from college adds stress in the whole process. And if you look at it, the history of college admissions was not designed to be for that purpose. It was like, okay, apply to a set of schools and have aspirations, but also know each one of those schools. The colleges you think are very likely that you will get into, you should also love them and, have an opinion that my life in college is going to be a start point. Or a particular exam, like in the Indian context, which defines whether you get into A college or B college or C college or whatever college. It doesn't really help the student with the right information. The society, the system, the message that has been so ingrained, and it's a systemic problem where parents feel that that's what it is. It's their aspirations to see their kids succeed. Very good aspiration. But what is it actually doing? And what are they doing to help them understand those choices they make? Is adding to the stress. So this is just one fear of failure. Again, low self-esteem, which could stem from that, or even for various reasons, being susceptible to be controlled by people who have higher self-esteem or excessive self-esteem can cause damage. So it leads to, sadly, to an extreme where kids have lost their lives or committed suicide, and that trend is unfortunately increasing a lot in India. Not many people talk about it. Many schools have created communities of care and create systems, but it requires more dialogue and more grassroots level intervention where kids are also taught to know the tenets of a good community of care. There are various models in different regions of the world where communities, be it faith-based communities or even large corporations who have been successful in promoting well-being. I think we need to adapt that and include that model in conversations in schools.
Yeah. I think that's something that should be a part of the curriculum as well. Like you have specific periods for certain subjects, maybe something of that sort, a different school, which brings me to another important thing that you were talking and you shared about one of the projects, if you feel like sharing a bit about that.
Yeah, so addressing some of these issues and connecting the dots from, where I feel sort of strongly that we have solutions. It's not just about having dialogues. I think we should. So the liberal view is discuss everything. It's free speech. But let's just say the more traditional view is let's also find solutions. And, we already have solutions. Believe in those solutions, right? And the importance of a family unit, the importance of the idea of knowing what is truth, knowing what gives you more purity in terms of strength, which environments are where you find respect. How do you align your life around these things? These are very important conversations to have. And then helping students grasp some of the very negative frameworks they live their lives with, or they see their friends around them. Understanding not many people are having conversations about things which need to be discussed. So the idea behind my new initiative is to have a school for the heart. And that's what it's called. It's called School for the Heart. And the key here is to understand that schools traditionally have been places where you are respected or you're given accolades or you're applauded or accepted in a club, in a society, or in an honor society, or whatever, a blue badge or what red tie and whatnot. In a sense that is kind of very temporary. It doesn't really give you joy forever. How many kids remember that we had a red tie in college or in school, and then that's what defined us? Some do, and they suffer because they turn out to be lunatics later on. But it's important to give them these frameworks to live their lives by and give them examples from literature and from the real modern world to make it accessible. So what I've taken is traditional ancient wisdom from the East, India, and Asian sort of literatures, and converted that into a modern framework using, of course, a lineage of knowledge from various teachers I respect who are currently alive. Some of them have been long gone, 500, 600 years ago. So using that Bhakti traditional literature that I've sort of tried to learn, there's enough to find solutions for these problems, at least at the family unit level. And if the family unit is educated, they can go out in the world and protect themselves and be safe from ingesting the wrong things, developing wrong habits, and also inspire others. So it becomes an issue of how do we create a space for spiritual growth using these fantastic tools, which are so applicable and practical in today's world, especially in the world of AI. AI might not be able to catch up on this.
Yeah. It's so interesting, because we have this wisdom of the 7 chakras, and how do you maintain that balance in your body, in your thoughts. And I think that should be a part of the curriculum, like you said.
Yeah, I'm totally fascinated. I think in our conversations, you've referred to certain books in the past and people you've met. And I think just having a panel and bringing those conversations to mainstream is the need of the hour. And also not just having conversations, like I said, supporting initiatives which are trying to actually provide that education. So there's a school which we have traditionally known and we know where it's going. If you follow the West, there'll be guns in schools, there'll be teachers being violated, they would be scared to attend school. I know I'm just trying to maybe talk like a right-wing American here, but I'm not. I'm looking at it from a perspective of the worst case scenario, and which is already playing out in so-called developed countries. So in order to save India or other societies from that, clearly we need to address and look within.
We have these interventions, right? Okay. Now, moving to the last section of our conversation. This is a bit about right now the decision time is going on. And like you mentioned that, there are students and there's this fear of acceptance. Can you suggest certain resources or places if a child feels anxious, let's say about the result, like who should they reach out to, and if there are certain resources that you can recommend?
No, I think it's a very good question. And I think I struggled a lot with in my teenage years to feel accepted in a sort of athlete, or have my own self-worth defined by doing certain things or achieving certain things. So it's not a new thing. Whereas coupled with the fact that you're just awaiting, say, a board result or a college admissions. And as of now, we've gone past that whole college admission season, but let's say we were a few months, behind in time. Yes, kids would be very, very anxious. Now they have their decisions out, and there's a different kind of anxiety which is building up, like college that I've deposited, is it good enough? Or, what do I do next? Will I be able to sort of survive in that setting? So there's a constant loop of thinking about what their life will be like in the future. So they're postponing their life to an event that will happen in some schedule course, maybe a few weeks, a few months. So how do we live in the present is actually where the solution lies. And it's important to sort of take it in your stride. I think I'd like to dig deeper. So if you could repeat the main question, I
mean,
want to
because
spend more time on it.
typically what happens is that, students and kids, not even, let's not call them students, like kids in this age, 13 to 17 years of age bracket, right? While they're preparing for colleges. So they have, like you said, they have so many of expectations. The parents have expectations and so on and so forth. They don't want to open up so much. Like, it's a problem that, if I share it with somebody else, what are they going to think about me? There is that question, for example, without again naming schools, I studied in one. There were segregations, like 95% above that was called the super ability section then.
And now we know it's
Right. So, I mean, that I somehow don't subscribe to that sort of a mentality, first of all, at all. And I see students struggling, the kids struggling these days, because they don't have an agony aunt figure, first of all, in their life, not many of them.
Yeah.
So, which is where they don't share. So, maybe AI, you mentioned, like, you could have that conversation, but
you still need to write the right prompts.
Yes.
The right answers.
So, how do we deal with that? Like, what resources? How can I open up if I don't feel like sharing it with anyone?
So what we do at School for the Heart is, to address this, we talk about quality of your outcomes would depend on the focus that you have, the endeavor that, the effort that you put in. But also there's one thing which is uncertainty of the outcome and accepting that. Like the last part is the most difficult in a current sort of framework of education or whatever, the societal sort of expectations and everything else kind of makes it very difficult to believe that my effort as an individual, and that's where, the Indic knowledge traditions versus the Western model of education differ a lot. Believing that we have control over everything. If we put the right effort and focus, we will definitely get our results. If not today, we'll keep doing it. Not many people have the resilience to keep doing it. And they don't find themselves, and they figure out that their life's gone by and they've not achieved anything because they've constantly compared and tried to do things which others were doing and not trying to do what they were doing, what they should be doing. So the last part, which is again linked to spirituality, and I think it's clear that spirituality is misunderstood and considered old-fashioned. Accepting that as a society and changing it is critical. So having a higher world view, and what I maybe respect in Elon Musk is he's doing one thing right, which is he's trying to take on big problems, and he's like qualified as he's energetic, he's eccentric, whatever it is, but he's actually trying to solve really big problems. So I think that gives a lot of credit that he's not afraid of failing. So in some sense, he's actually equipped to do a lot better. And if he changes a few more things, it could maybe make him really a legendary figure, not just for a few years beyond his lifespan, but a long time. But so that's where it is. Like, you can accept the idea that failure is a reward. And I think very often students, parents, the system doesn't let them believe that and believe it strongly and welcome failure. And knowing that effort and endeavor is really crucial. The reward is not in your hand. There's something which will give you your destiny, or the universal spirit, soul, or something that you really want to have faith in will take care of it. And if it's not coming now, there's a reason why it's not coming. Accept it. So there are so many ways to have a prayerful mood to make your life filled with gratitude. And one simple way that we want to promote the idea of humility is to keep principles in mind that if you sort of always remember what good things other people have done to you. So your parents, your siblings, your friends, your teachers, just remind yourself that constantly, and that's where journaling comes in. Like, I have a journal, a WhatsApp journal, on reminding myself what good others have done to me this week or this day. There could be another WhatsApp group you can create with yourself, reminding yourself of maybe not so good things you've done to others, so that you don't repeat them again. And there's another WhatsApp group you could create to develop humility, which is never forget the harm that you've done to others. Okay, you can just rephrase it in your own way, but you get the drift. Like the idea is to develop humility, knowing that if you have that and if you keep that, you can develop a mood by which you work and exist in your life, in your work, in your family, in society, in your profession. So it's not a very difficult life. I think it's people make it out to be extremely difficult. Life can be very simple.
I think Stoicism 101 should be something that, everyone should aspire for.
Yep.
Then, because at least you're able to look at your decisions from a very rational point of view and say, okay, fine, things happened.
Yep.
I learned something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I have this thing. Our logo is like 4 Pac-Mans looking at like 4 different directions, and there's a little crimson dot, nothing to do with Harvard. We're trying to eat it up, literally. So the Pac-Man goes up, eats it up, goes left, goes right. So the idea is that every step of your journey, be it walking towards the dream college of your dreams, is a reward. So don't think that just getting in is the biggest reward. It's that little Pac-Man, pack. It gives you a reward right away and gives you superpowers eventually. And if you get eaten up by a demon along the way, then you get a second chance.
Great. So Arjun, before we wind up this conversation, and since we are talking about India at One Young India, doing a development dialogue series, we know that India is sitting on a demographic dividend right now, what we call as a dividend.
For a few decades only.
Yes. That can easily become a demographic disaster.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you have for young people? Because even today, although I am younger to you and you have been my teacher, I still am, aged. I'm older than 50% of India's population today.
Mm-hmm.
So what advice do you have so that we do not turn into a disaster?
Yeah. So again, it's a bit controversial. Like I think it's not cool to talk about ashrams. We have a place and time for people of different ages to support society. And being middle-aged as a country as a majority, is not a bad thing. Or being young is obviously a great gift with the youthful energy and things you could do. So I think seeing the interconnections and the transitions in life, that today you are considered the young who will probably bring that youthful energy, ideas, entrepreneurship, creativity, and take India forward, in one hand is a daunting sort of thought for many young people who don't know what's going on or are being sort of intoxicated by, digital sort of consumerism. But for the ones who are awake, it's a gift as well. They can do a lot. At the same time, the ones who are wise can know that they can sort of transition from one ashram to another. So when we look at sunset years, it's like considered, or golden years, sunset would seem a little negative, whereas just working around the terminology just changes the perception. So yeah, kind of, if you believe that you're going to be supportive to different sort of eras for leaders of India, so let's just say they should embrace the fact that India or any society in the world has its own average age, but that shouldn't define where the progress should be made. Certain principles are clearly universal. The guidelines change based on different ashrams or the average age of the population is. So the guidelines to run a country might change, but the principles shouldn't change. I think that's my half answer to your question. So I don't even think if that a solution for young people exists or one particular solution exists. I think what matters is to develop a practice which makes you more connected with yourself, carry that kind of attitude, and let's just call transcendental vibe with you all along in whatever you do. So that's where spirituality, role of meditation, practices, all of this really is important. And being taught in the right way, I think, is also important. The Yeah, I think these two things, coupled with, of course, universal principles of being kind, being humble, just kind of end with that. Start with humility and with humility. I think might not sound humble enough, but that's the message.
Perfect. Great. Um, just one last thing. I know, promise.
Yeah.
3 books that you would recommend a lifelong learner, or whatever you feel that you've read and are worth reading or worth sharing with everyone.
Yeah. Okay.
It could be books, it could be media.
That's fine. Yeah. That's fine. So I'm a little, I've gone through my journey of reading various types of. I was a big fan of autobiographies, biographies of hard rock and musicians when I was young, and I learned a lot about them through that, and I really respect what I learned. And of course, when the era of documentaries came along, because artists have a way of life. I think there's like I said, they look at life in a different way. They want to be not comfortable, but they seek patronage, and they want to do their thing. They want to put something out there in the world, and have a very unique voice. And it's very important to give them shelter in society. And I think so. Just reading about artists is one thing that I really love, be it visual or performing artists, and now new age, whatever, new media artists. And their perspectives really shake you up if you have conversations with an artist who really documents what they do. It's just outstanding creative. So that's one. The second would be, while growing up, I would really read a lot on ethics and businesses, because I don't know what that bug came to me, and I would, at one time at the US IS library, I would spend hours taking out photocopies of different articles from Harvard Business Review and MIT Stern Review and other sources on ethics in business. And the more I read, the more I got drawn to the idea of guiding principles in business. And I think it's relevant even today. Most of the topics that were covered way back in 1950s to today, I think they're pretty universal. So that's another thought. Like, and when I say business, it's a unit. So it's a system. So it could be a nonprofit, it could be a school, it could be anything else. So picking up, and sharp brains exist in the business world. So the documentation was really rich with case studies and everything else. So I think ethics in society, material on that. And last, but of course, Bhakti literature, which is Bhakti yoga. And there's a whole lineage of writings from all over the world, particularly authors who are now from all over the world, but originated in India. And within India, over the 10th century onwards, there's been a plethora of movements, Bhakti saint movements, which have really made it clear as to why we are in this world and why we are the way we are. We're constantly moving from seeking happiness, but we suffer. And then again, we sort of also go through the whole cycle of suffering and, feeling rewarded and happy. So what's the way out? I think it's a philosophical question. There's a Western way of looking at it. There's an Indian way or Asian way of looking at it. And I think just that discussion, debate, making frameworks, meeting people who have thought deeply about those subjects is just a pleasure. So there's a whole library. I'll invite you home one day and then we can browse through some of those texts. There's not one book, but I would say certain bodies of knowledge which I would pick. So read about artists, read about ethics in society, and obviously, connect yourself to some spiritual literature.
Okay, well, that's a very nice way of summing it up. So thank you so much, Arjun, for your time. It's been a pleasure. Learned so much again. And I really hope that we continue these conversations in times to come, maybe with your new project, School for the Heart.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, let's make more students sort of aligned to their goals in a way which is truly reflecting their purpose.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.